Welcome back to React Native Radio Podcast. Brought to you by Semicolons, the walkie-talkie of programming. Over. Episode 186, Organizing Your Source Files.
Hey everyone, welcome to the React Native Radio Podcast, where we explore React Native together. I'm your host, Jamin Holmgren, and with me are my stupendous co-hosts today, all three of you, Harris, Robin, and Aditi. Aditi, how are you doing? You're on a new computer today, aren't you?
I am. I'm on MacBook Pro 2019. Happy New Year to everyone listening.
Yes, Happy New Year to you as well. It's nice to be on this side of it. And we have Harris. Harris, where are you today now that you've had a little bit of time off? I'm sure you've moved all around the world.
I'm still in Montreal, actually, and looks like the COVID situation is getting worse here. So we have curfews now. So okay. I have to stay home and we can't leave after 8. I think in the US, if that happened, that would be there would be riots on the street right now.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Right. Okay.
No comment, unfortunately. Oh, wow. It's getting a little.
It's been a day.
It's been a day. It has been a day. This will be released in a couple weeks, but this is we're recording this just after the whole weirdness that just happened, and so we won't go into that. But last I think we heard you were in Vancouver. Now you're back in your home province, and locked down. And Canadians are like, that's cool. That's what we're supposed to do. Must be nice. And Robin, how are you doing today?
I am doing well, Jamin. I'm glad to be stupendous today.
Stupendous, yeah. I like that word.
I look forward to the next synonym in your list of words that mean awesome.
Stupendous always reminds me of Calvin and Hobbes, because wasn't there a Calvin and Hobbes book that was something about stupendous? I don't know. I'd have to look that up. I should have done that for my show prep. But I did other show prep today, and so we are going to be launching into that pretty soon. But before we do that, I do want to note that this episode is sponsored by, guess who? Infinite Red. Infinite Red is a premier React Native design and development agency located fully remote in the USA. We've been fully remote for a long time. We have years of React Native experience ever since it was released. Actually, since React Native Android was released, because iOS was released earlier that year, 2015, and then Android came out later. And then once that happened, we took that on and love it. Deep roots. We have deep roots in the React Native community, just like trees, I guess. I don't know. I don't know where I was going with that. And we also published the React Native newsletter to over 11,000. I think it's actually 12,000 subscribers. I should update my notes.
Wow.
We are the best choice for your React Native app, in my very objective opinion. Hit us up at hello@infinite.red. You can also email me directly, jamin@infinite.red. Learn more on our website, infinite.red. So our main topic today is organizing your source files.
It's one of those things that developers just love to argue about.
It is. It really is. And I really want to kind of I want to dive into why that is. I want to dive into the psychology of this. Does anybody have a psychology degree here? I feel like a psychology degree is pretty common because people are like, hey, that's the easiest degree. And so they go get that.
Ouch.
Yeah.
Did I just tick off a bunch of people?
Throwing shade. I know. They're probably not listening to this podcast, though. So
that's true. You're a psychology major. I don't know. Anyway, yes. We need to think about the psychology of this. Why do developers argue about this?
It makes us feel smarter.
It's a very personal. It's like your workspace.
Mm-hmm. It's like your desk.
It's like your desk, and it also affects how you organize your thoughts and how your mental model of what you're building. So It's very unique to each developer.
I think the reason we argue about it is if we're working with the team and if the team has different opinions, then we need to figure out, how do we put all these tools together in this toolbox? If you're working in silo, nobody cares.
Exactly. It's like having to organize your desk a certain way, but then you have to share it with everyone on your team.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Can you imagine if we all had to use the same desk and we had to organize it in a way that everybody was cool with it?
I know several people off the top of my head that would not do well having the same desk.
I suspect I know what you're talking about. This is one of the benefits of being remote is we don't even have to look at each other's desks. Like it's just out of the frame on Zoom.
Although we do have a fun Slack exercise that we do like once every 6 months called desk raid.
Oh, wow.
Yes. Desk raid.
Where someone will post in Slack and call a desk raid, and everyone in the thread posts a picture of their desk unaltered.
You can't clean it up.
No cleaning. You can't move anything. Just like as is.
I suspect the designers always clean them up because they're always so pristine. Is that really how they work?
Yes. I believe that.
Okay.
I have a confession. I stole desk raid and implemented it at different places. It's awesome. I think I saw Gant do it, so I have to give credit to Gant.
It's fun. It's fun if
really
you work remote because that's not an angle that you ever get to see from your coworkers, and it's just like a little window and
that's awesome
into their world.
Yeah.
I've done it on Twitter. That's been fun too. Just get people from all over the world to post pictures of their desk. It's fun. But we're talking about files and folders. So when I started coding, I used QBasic, and this was, I was 12. And in QBasic, you don't really have the concept of folders for the simple reason that your whole program's in one file. And this sounds unmanageable, but the way that QBasic gets around this, and I actually think it's brilliant, and I feel like we missed the ball not doing this, but the editor actually handles it for you. So what you can do is you can hit, I think it's F2. And when you hit F2, it pops up a screen that shows all of your functions and subroutines, which are basically functions that return void. They don't return anything. But you can see they're all sorted alphabetically right in front of you. And you can just go and hit enter on a, like navigate to a function and hit enter on it. And then it goes to a screen that just shows that function. It doesn't show anything else. Now it's in the same file. Like if you were to look at it in a different editor, you would see it just among all the other functions at the end of the file.
So wait, what's the editor that you have to use?
It's just the QBasic editor.
Okay, but you couldn't, VS Code wouldn't do the same thing for you?
I don't know.
It probably would. I wonder if there's like an
extension.
extension. There probably is.
Maybe. Yeah, but it's something we don't really do all that. Maybe like I haven't worked in like the Visual Studio, world or visual, like these other applications. Maybe there are IDEs that do this for you, but I do remember QBasic doing this. And so like one thing I do just for nostalgia's sake is I have a copy of Gorilla.bas. And I think everybody here is quite a bit younger than me, but back in the day, Gorilla was like one of the first programs that people would see the source code for because it was, and I'm actually going to share my screen. Those of you on the podcast will not be able to see this, but I'm going to show it to my co-hosts here. And you can see that here's all this, basic code. And I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom if I can get VS Code to work. And we have 1,150 lines of code, okay? But each of these subroutines and functions, and there's a function, SCL, pass the number in to scale for CGA. That's because there were different like monitors and monitor modes and stuff. And so, but all you would see if you went to like the SCL function after hitting F2 was just this. That's all you would see is just that function, which is like, 10 lines of code, okay? You would just see that. And then to go back to the main one, it would actually basically scroll you right back to the top and you could kind of see everything else, right?
Is the reason it has to be like this is just that the language doesn't have any like concept of like importing or like bringing things in from other files. Okay.
I don't think it did, yeah. And so that was sort of a limitation that led to this particular innovation. The benefit, of course, is you can distribute your program as just a single file. It's really simple. You don't have to zip up a folder. It's pretty straightforward.
But
now, if we were doing this today,
developer experience, though.
Yeah. Well, and especially if you're sharing with someone. So, like, if you were doing this today, what would merge conflicts look
conflicts?
like? Yeah.
I don't even want to know.
I'd imagine that Git would handle it differently. Like, there would be some other way. But yeah, it's just kind of an interesting peek into the past of, one single file. Now, you can go beyond that and be like, okay, well, this function could be in its own file. Like, we could do a .bas file that you could then import at the top, and then you have access to that function in your main area. And then now you have these applications that have you see this in like older C programs a lot, where you'll have a bunch of files all at the kind of the root.c files. So that's sort of the next evolution of this.
So in the file you showed us, do they have to be on chronological order, the functions? Or can they all be jumbled up and it'll still know it?
That's a very good question. I believe that they are actually in alphabetical order, and then it would insert based on the name of the function that you create. Because you would to create a new function, you would hit create new from the menu and then name it, and then it would insert it in alphabetical order, which would please all the pedants who, looked at the file and wanted to see.
Wow, you took us to a journey. In the 1990s, I'm guessing.
Yes. Back probably before you were born.
I was born.
Okay. Sorry. So it's definitely it's a different way. And of course, BASIC was intended for beginners, too. It wasn't actually necessarily supposed to be for people making, really serious applications. I did see recently a game called Black Annex. Now, it's not actually all that recent. It was back, several years ago, but it was a really cool game. I didn't know it was written in QBasic, but they were actually releasing it on Steam, and it actually has it's sort of a pixel art game, and it looks really fun and stuff like that. But they actually wrote it in a somewhat newer version of QBasic called QB64, which you can actually compile to an executive file. So someone is still using it apparently for, games and stuff. But yeah, this is a peek into our past. So you have these files. Now programmers feel the need to start categorizing them. You don't, if you have 150 source files in your root folder, that can get a little tough to manage. Although Robin and I worked with a guy who advocated for this.
If you're listening, Ryan, you know who you are, was a fan of completely flat project structure. So all of your files just in the root, and just use your editor to find what you're looking for. Which, I mean, with the way editors work now, it's not hard to just pull up the file that you want, assuming you've named it in a helpful way. I don't think this will work if you have
index.js, index2.js.
Index2.js.
Imagine though, let's just follow this a little bit. Let's say that it's component-menu.js or something. I guess, you could deal with that. It would sort, all the components would be good together because it's all at the beginning of the file name.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to kind of follow this thought.
Oh yeah.
There's something about it that's kind of appealing.
You can do a lot with your naming structure to give your files a little bit of predictable sort order. Yeah. And you don't, if someone opens the project, they don't have to hunt through folders to find what they're looking for. Mm-hmm. So that's definitely an advantage.
Just have to hunt through files. But one thing that's kind of interesting about it is, sometimes you'll drill way down into, and we're going to get to deep folder structures later, but you drill all the way down and you're like, oh, there's one file in that folder. Or you drill all the way down and all of a sudden there's 20 files in that folder. It's not discoverable, but if they're all in the same, you're going to see them. In your
Android project, you'll drill down and it's just folder. Mm-hmm. And you have to go through 6 layers of folders before you actually get to a file.
Let me actually read. I looked as part of my show prep to see how deep this goes, and it's myapp/android/app/source/main/java/com/myapp, and then there's a file in there.
Yeah, and the Android folder structure always at least me scratching my head a bit. And I'm like, wait, which main am I in? Which app? Mm-hmm. Which app am I in? Which build am I in?
Which Gradle? Harris, have you ever thought about just putting all your files into the root folder of your app?
Yeah, I kind of agree with Ryan here. I would just do everything flat. So I think honestly, I don't think too much about I'll just typically go with whatever's there. But there are some advantages, I guess, to something like DDD. I don't know if we want to dive into that right now.
Yeah, we can certainly dive into that. So obviously, flat structure is not the only thing, but we're as programmers have sort of, gotten more and more sophisticated apps, we've come up with all these different ideas. So Harris is going to jump right into one of the actually more complex ones that I've found, DDD. Go ahead and explain that.
The main benefit for DDD is really that if you're in at least the way I see it is if you're in a large team, you could really benefit from that design pattern because it reduces the commit surface area of your code base. So, the main idea behind it is that if you're working on a specific domain in your application, you should only be touching like these files, right? And what will happen is you're probably going to get less merge conflicts down the road. You're not going to have to go across different areas of your code. So really reducing the commit area of your code base. So I can see that being really useful in a large team.
Did we define what DDD is?
We did not.
We should probably define what DDD is real quick.
It stands for Domain-Driven Design File Structure.
And design, of course, meaning the design of our folder structure and our architecture of the app, not design, not UI design.
I think the basic idea is you organize your project in a way that makes sense for the business logic of what you're building.
What's an example? Let's get some examples out there.
So if you have an app that has maybe the concept of like users and like things that go around users, like profile editing and like maybe managing friends, something like that, stuff that like has to do with users, then those files would all be kind of grouped together. And then if you had another part of your app that was like widgets, like you're like listing a product or something, everything to do with like those widgets would go together.
Yeah, I remember encountering this first with Ember. Ember started kind of pushing a layout. They called it pods, which I actually like that a little bit. It's like you just have this little container, this pod, and it has, everything you need in it. So the way that they explain it is pods-based projects organize files by features, combining all entity files into a common directory. And so then they show an example, and you would have like your app, and then you'd have post. And then under post, you would have controller.js, model.js, route.js, and template.hbs, which is their handlebars template format that they use. So in your app, if you wanted to edit something to do with a post, you would just go into the post folder, and then everything you need is there, like all of your files that have to do with posts there. And as Harris said, it reduces the surface area. You're in one area, like you're not scattered all over the app.
One good way to think about it in terms of mobile apps could be like if you have an app that has a tab bar and you have like 3 or 4 tabs that sort of section your app. Each one of those is probably a particular domain that you would be dividing your app into. I'm
actually not a huge fan of that architecture. I think I can see the benefits for large teams, but typically I work in very small teams and I don't really feel the benefit of it like personally, but I can definitely see how, like if you're Airbnb, that would like greatly benefit you.
I used to work for a team which was quite large a few years ago, and we had the shared code base across like 4 or 5 different UI teams. So the only way for us to, not step onto each other's toes was doing the DDD folder structure. So we know for sure, okay, this is our team. We won't even touch any of those guys. Like, let's say there was a documentation team. We wouldn't touch anything that's under the document folder. There would be a ton of stuff. And then I would be in the orders team, so I'll just focus on the orders. So that helped if you were working with teams that you wouldn't even meet and have any interaction with. But for some reason, architecturally, you're sharing that code base. But I personally wouldn't use this model for smaller projects.
A lot of times, well, I guess when I started programming more, I guess, in earnest in 2005, I grouped things. I remember actually, okay, so here's Jamin again, going back into the old days. I remember when the very first websites I started building, I used the flat folder structure because it was like index.html, and about.html. This was not rocket science here. And then I started using PHP because, and it's kind of weird, but like I wanted to say copyright 2005 and then have that automatically update to 2006.
That was your only reason for switching
This
to
is the
PHP?
only reason. This is why I am here today.
That's hilarious. Wait, it was like jQuery not a thing? Or like...
No, well, jQuery was definitely not, I don't think, a thing. There was JavaScript. I could have done it with JavaScript. I didn't know JavaScript. Yeah. I was, so I started using, and the other thing though, Robin, it wasn't just that. I also was like, I had to like rewrite the menu in every page, because like an HTML file, you can't include another one.
Right.
So that was the other thing. So that was actually a pretty big, PHP, I could include files and I could, of course, do the whole date thing. So I actually created a folder just called library, and I would put like common files in that folder, and I would just have like header.php, footer.php, etc. Functions.php. I remember writing that, like, oh, I just need a function that, does whatever. That, of course, quickly became not, inadequate. And so I had to do something different. I actually eventually wrote my own framework, and it was called PHP Genesis. It was really cool. I still think it was one of the coolest, most productive things I've ever worked in. I had folders in there. I had like a pages folder and I had a models folder. So this is I guess the other more common way to go about it is to split things up by what they are. So you have, components, you have controllers, you have models, you have routes. Maybe if you're in a web context, you might have many other things. I18N might be a thing. So you're splitting them up by what they are. And I remember Rails, when we started doing Rails in 2010, it was like, okay, so they already have a convention here. They have your app folder, and inside of your app folder, you have controllers, you have models, you have views. And if you want to create a new route, you would create a file in each of those pretty much. You're going to be touching files in each of those. So that was my other experience with this, and it worked pretty well, but you're definitely touching a lot of different folders when you're creating or editing something. Robin, you worked with Rails. What was your experience with that?
Well, when I was working with Rails, I was still so new to programming, because that's what I learned on. That's the framework that the boot camp that I went to used. And so I wasn't really in a position to have any kind of opinion about folder structure, because the way I was bringing it in was just like, this is just how it is. And I didn't really know any different. And now it's been, oh my gosh, 4 years since I've done Rails. So I honestly don't remember how I felt about the folder structure, because that was just what you did. That was just the way things were.
It's usually not worth it to try to fight convention in a situation like that.
Well, especially with something like Rails, where it's so widely used. Yeah. And I mean, with Rails, convention is kind of the point. Yeah. Like, I mean, that's was it the official motto of Rails? Like, convention over configuration?
Pretty much. Yeah, I think it is.
So it's like, you do it the way that everyone does it, because that's just what you do. And it makes it easier to have sort of a shared experience with all the other Rails developers in the world.
Exactly. I was a tab indentation person when I was using PHP. And when we moved to Rails, I was using tabs, and one of my programmers was like, hey, everybody uses spaces, 2 spaces in Ruby. I'm like, yeah, but tabs are better. And he told me something I've never forgot, and I actually really appreciated it. He said, sometimes standard is better than better.
Standard is better than better. Yeah.
I was like, oh, you're right. You're right. It is better than better.
But really, spaces are objectively better. Let's settle that right now.
We're going to have this right now.
I remember being in code reviews where like the only comments would be like spaces, add spaces, no tabs. I'm like, dude, review my code.
We should have a whole segment about spaces versus tabs. But that's a can of worms.
I'll leave all my snarky comments for that.
But so, yes, it's a good point that standard is better than better.
I'll tell you what, I have used spaces ever since. If I start a brand new project that nobody will see except for myself, I still use spaces, but I still maintain that tabs are better. Anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you use prettier?
Prettier.
That's the whole episode. Use prettier. Then we're done. Like, right, whatever.
Yeah.
Standard is better than better.
Standard is better than better. I actually really like that. And there are situations where you should jump out of that and do something different, but it should be deliberate. It shouldn't just be, that's my preference or whatever.
I mean, I will say, as long as it's been a long time since I did Rails, but I do remember the feeling of being able to open anybody's Rails project.
Yeah.
And know where I was. And that is absolutely not true with React Native or probably pretty much any JavaScript framework.
I think you hit on something really key there, and that is just the being able to jump in and have a common understanding of where things are. So if we were to bring this back to sort of like a construction crew, analogy, if you were a person who maybe goes between several crews in a particular month, maybe, and one crew has their truck set up one way with like all of the hand tools are in the front and all of the power tools are in the back and all the nails are in the middle, then you'd get used to that. And then if you were to go to another crew and they have their power tools with the nails that they need and, the hand tools that tend to go with that power tool all in one box, kind of in different spots, it would kind of screw you up. And if you were trying to get some work done, you'd be like running around the truck trying to find the right tool. And I've actually experienced this. Like I work construction, so I know what that's like. And that would get very frustrating where and developers often will jump between projects. And so if you, especially consultants like we are, so when you can jump from one project to another and instinctively know exactly where to find things, you don't even have to think about it. You just grab it and you go. That there's a lot of value there.
Yeah.
I think that there are differences between different approaches and there's different trade-offs, and some are, I think, objectively better than others in some ways, certainly at least to my mind.
We need universal folder structure in React Native.
Okay, so let's talk about that. Let's talk about specifically React Native.
Let's do that.
Projects.
So one of the things that kind of jumps out to me, you mentioned this already, Robin, is the Android folder structure. It's very deep. It just keeps going and going and going. And to me, like, there's this tendency programmers have to want to really get it pedantically correct with their folder structure. Mm-hmm. They really want to do this. They want to make sure that
they're trying to convey meaning.
Yes.
And categorization. Like, I mean, by having a folder that has a main and something else.
Yes. I think it's tests. Yeah.
You're communicating
or debug
to the developer that what they're going to find in this folder is specifically related not to testing, but to it's for communication.
I've noticed that with like the Android folder that we're talking about, since it's all in Java, I've noticed that other teams too, like with Java, that's kind of the convention they use. They kind of drill deep into like that folder structure.
A Java developer can feel at home inside the Android directory.
Right. So I think that's kind of what it represents, just the Java conventions.
Yeah. And it's also where I think Android Studio would find it. I think if you put it somewhere else, then Android Studio wouldn't find it. You'd have to do some configuration, or maybe it wouldn't even work. I don't know.
Who knows?
And this is a little bit of one of the challenges of React Native. You're working within two other ecosystems, not just your own. You have iOS and you have Android. But this can be, it's interesting though, because you're having to, no matter, like, you're just trying to find your main, like, application file, and you're having to go and look at, like, of course, Android makes sense, but then you're at app, source, main, Java, com, my app, and then you finally find the main application. So you're having to make these decisions. If you're drilling down, you're having to make these decisions every time. So there's some, instead of having a main and a debug folder, you could have that at the end of the tree, at the node, you could have a main application.java and you could have a debug application.java or something like that. I'm just spitballing a little bit here, but
I could be wrong, but I think with Android, I don't know if it's just for communication. I think you actually, because unlike JavaScript projects, you actually do get something by following their structure for free, right? Like, for example, just when you run like a release versus debug, like you don't have to worry about like which like activity file to use. You don't have to worry. Yeah, you do get certain benefits that if you don't follow their structure, you don't. Whereas in JavaScript, you don't get those benefits anyway. So
yeah, it makes sense. And we're playing in their playground, so we have to be good citizens and use their folder structure. It's fine.
Think about it. How often do we even drill into those folders?
Right.
If you're using Expo, you're not even going to look at it.
Yeah.
And if with React Native CLI, I hardly ever go into that folder at all.
The only reason I ever go in is if I'm doing like a one-off release build and I have to go find the build artifact.
Yeah. That makes sense.
So it's not like a daily,
it's not a daily problem
that
at all.
we'll face. Yeah.
Plus, the last thing I need is some obscure native error that took me a whole day because I didn't put something in the right place.
In this case, use the most standard
possible.
Don't
mess with it. Don't mess with it.
Standard is better.
Yes, exactly.
Like even where you put your key store, stuff like that. Like once I put my key store in the wrong place and like I was like spending hours trying to figure out why it wouldn't read it.
Totally.
Like, yeah.
Right, yeah.
So I think we're all in agreement there. Like use whatever the conventions are there. But then once you get to the JavaScript side, what you get with React Native init is like an app.js file. You don't even get any folders. So I guess what they're telling us is they want all of your code in one file.
That would be the conclusion that you could come to.
I think we're done.
That's the official React Native stance, is everything in app.js.
It is. Let me go find my ending comments.
While we're talking about this, I should give big kudos to Infinite Red's the Ignite boilerplate.
Oh.
So the very first time I was doing React Native, like one of my teammates and I were like, what folder structure do we use? How do we put these things? And we're like, hey, there's this cool thing called Ignite. I think it was version 1. And we're like, let's check this out. And it came out with the boilerplate and nice folder structure. And we used that for a couple of years. So
that's actually a really good segue into like, where do you go from app.js after you have initted your React Native project?
So we ran into this early when we started using React Native. We had our sort of native structures that we liked, but we had to come up with something for that. So we did come up with, we had a lot of discussions and we came up with what you saw in the original Ignite. And that was like an app folder. It had
components,
screens, containers,
styles.
Styles, I think, were in their own folder.
Tests,
fixtures,
models. We were using Redux, so it would have been reducers and things like that.
Sagas.
Yeah, sagas. So yeah, those were all what came out in the original Ignite, and that worked really well. We then went to a different architecture later. One of our engineers really wanted to sort of explore a different direction. And Robin, I don't remember if you worked on the original Bowser, if you did any apps that were in the original Bowser one.
I don't think I worked on it. I do vaguely remember the original presentation that he made about it. And it was it was originally very, very domain driven.
Very
I think there was at least one project that I did that was on that very, very first iteration of Bowser that was very domain driven.
I remember one of the discussions being, are screens components?
Yes. Is it why that is the eternal discussion?
I want to ask you, yes, 100%. I want to ask you, Harris, are screens components? Should they be in the components folder?
I don't think so.
Yeah. I mean, technically they are components. Everybody agrees they are components.
Well, yeah, that's the answer, right? It's like, technically, yes, but they're special.
But they're special. Exactly. And you see this also with things like layouts or pages on the website of things.
Yeah. Again, it comes down to communication, right? Like if I see screens and components, like how do I differentiate? And then like, do you want to nest more folders in component? Maybe you can nest like screens in components, but then what do you do with actual components? Like,
yeah.
And they have different roles. Like your screens in a lot of cases, your screens are going to be what's hooked up to your state management. There's a lot of differences, and I think it's important to communicate that.
I think this is one of those things where like maintaining that standard really helps. So we know for sure, okay, what they mean. We don't want to go into a React Native project and look at screens inside components, although, they are components.
Yeah, I think originally he kind of won on that, and he did put screens in the components. In fact, they weren't even like in their own folder. It was just mixed in with the other components. It was like login screen was next to button, or whatever. So
if that's how he did it, it didn't last very long.
Because
I don't remember. I don't remember that being.
I think even he hated after a while.
I think like the Ignite that I checked out like so many years ago didn't have that. It had like containers and components.
Oh yeah, containers.
And,
we did have containers.
Andros does have containers. Yeah.
Containers,
Redux.
Containers were basically like screens, I guess.
They were screens. Basically,
I
think we just called them containers.
Which I hated. I did not like that name. Containers did not make sense to me. They're screens. Like, how would you think of it if you looked at it in a design? It's a screen.
Right, yeah.
Now, there's sort of the pedantic thing that, well, sometimes they're not the full screen. Sometimes it's like, a partial pop-up or something like that.
Doesn't include the header or doesn't,
These exceptions.
I still go with the containers convention. Most of my projects.
Oh, you do? Yeah. Okay. Well, I hate it.
Yeah. I do agree with the note that it could sometimes be half the screen. I do like agree. The word containers because of that. There could be like sliders and stuff that you can have like partial splits.
You're not wrong.
So, but
You're not wrong.
Yeah, screen, container, same thing in my head.
I think it made a bit more sense when we were using higher order components, because then your container could just be an HOC.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Oh yeah.
And that's what they were. So that totally makes sense to me. But I've always been practical, like pragmatic. When I look at like even PHP Genesis, I mentioned this earlier. I created a PHP framework. It was like pages, it was very like connected to the thing that the way that I model it, I guess in my mind, isn't about how I'm accomplishing it. It's the what the thing is. And so the fact that I'm happening to reuse a piece of technology called components to create a screen doesn't matter to me. It's a screen,
Right. We have to sort of separate the concept of a React component, the technology, from the concept of like a little reusable, movable piece of UI, essentially.
One thing that we also did was we had a styles folder, and I think it was even, I certainly know for websites, I used to have like a styles.css. File, just one, and I would just dump everything in there. That was obviously not
it felt like having a separate styles folder was somewhat of a carryover from web, where your styles are always separate from your UI layout.
And that had to do with the technology too, because you were importing it differently on the front end. So we actually then with Bowser, and this was something that has stuck, included the styles with the component. So it'd be like login, .ts, and then we have login styles.ts.
And actually in Bowser, I don't actually know what the current iteration of Bowser has, but in most of my projects that use Bowser Stack, styles are not even in a different file.
They're in the same file.
They're in the same file.
And why do we do that?
And why do we do that? Because I just got really tired of needing to change a style, and then because especially if you're debugging, if you're tracing, like you trace it to the component and then you need to change the style, and you're like, now I have to find the style file and open that up, versus just like scroll a little bit and there it is.
Little bit of friction there.
Yeah. I typically have it like, if I have a bunch of components, I would have the styles within the styles folder, which is just one step above it. So I would be like, okay, header component, and then we would have a header style file for it.
Yeah, there are a lot of different ways. I actually have a lower sort of what we call a GAFO at Infinite Red, which is, how much I care about it. And we've probably explained that in other podcasts. But yeah, it's basically like a 1 to 10. 1 is I don't care. 10 is I will literally quit. if you do this. And so I have a low gaffo on the whole styles discussion, but I do know that a lot of our teams like to put them in the same files, or at least in the same folder.
Mm-hmm. And it's the same for tests too.
Yeah.
Co-locating the test file right with the component.
How much do you think the sort of awkwardness around importing, where you have .. .. is, it kind of plays into this? Like if every import started at the root, like at the app, and you just immediately had, styles / my component name, do you think that would affect our psychology around it? Because then it would start feeling more natural, like styles / whatever that's where I'm importing my styles from, versus .. styles /
We also have, Webpack and stuff that can help with, these folder namings. You don't need that many .. slashes. But I agree. I think with styles, as long as we keep it close somewhere, either within the same file, as Robin mentioned,
either in name too,
in name and closeness around the location, I think it should be okay. And sometimes it's just muscle memory. You know where this is, because you've been in that project for so long.
Yeah. The way I see it, it's not just about the path. Like, let's say you want to delete a component, right? You probably want to delete its tests and styles at the same time.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you just go in that folder and you just get rid of the whole thing.
Delete the whole folder. That is definitely an advantage to the co-location strategy.
Yeah.
Ryan Florence once described it this way: how do I know that I can delete this file? Basically, if you're co-locating everything, I don't think I actually did justice to how he said it, but it's basically the idea of, how do you know, like especially styles, how do I know I can delete a style? And if you're in a styles.ts file that's at your root, like, you're not going to know, like, where is this being used? If you are in a folder, or even better, in the same file, you know where it's being used. It's not being imported anywhere else. It's right there. And so the kind of more generic that you make something, it's more reusable, but the more kind of harder it is to determine who's using it. And so there's a trade-off there.
Right.
But of course, we're not going to necessarily just put like our model or our store in the same file. If we did that, then we would have hooks. Sorry, I joke. But if you have a centralized store, you probably are going to put it somewhere central. And so that's a trade-off. We generally don't need to worry about it as much. It's not like styles where things kind of move around as much. When you're modeling your domain, you generally know where things are. So I think that's a piece of this as well. Okay, so we've done a lot of, and we've kind of hinted around our preferences. I think the audience probably has a somewhat of an understanding of where we stand on things, but I'd like to actually ask each of you, what is your favorite? Like, I guess all of us agree, if you're jumping into a project that already has a standard, you're going to use the standard. But if you're in charge, if you're the founder of the startup, and you're just, or you're the CTO or whatever, and you're creating the new app and you're just starting from scratch, what is your favorite folder structure? How do you like to approach this? Aditi, let's start with you.
So the way I usually do it is, if the app needs like also a web version, then I would completely separate them out. I would have like app components and web components. That way the components are separated, unless we're using something like React Native Web. And I would have like the typical assets folder, fixtures, services, and all of that stuff. And I'd like to keep the Redux portion, if I use Redux, separated out. So Redux will be in its own folder. And all of the custom hooks too, I keep them in a separate folder. And then within the app components, I would have like the containers or screens, and then I would have components. And with React Native, we would have the entire navigation folder, which has all the navigation items. And specifically to styles, within the components, I would have like a styles folder, and I would have a separate styles file for each component, unless there's like a lot of sharing that goes on. So yeah, I would I would name the component. I don't like to do a lot of generic stuff, so I like to keep it specific. So I would have a header or a footer, a slider, whatever, and then I would have the styles have the same name, and then say header component style.js.
Okay.
That's kind of what I've been doing. And I do have usually like a library folder that would have like utils and things like that. Definitely like to keep like all of the business logic separate and Redux separate, and have the UI components just literally do that job.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. It's actually very similar to the initial version of Ignite, what we came up with there. And I think it's a very common pattern.
Yeah.
I'm curious, do you guys usually put the hooks in a separate folder outside of components?
So if within the component, I would use like the simple hooks like use effect or use state and all of that stuff. But if I have a custom hook, I would put it separately. Yeah.
I see. Okay, interesting.
We don't use a lot of custom hooks at Infinite Red because we use Mobx State Tree. But Robin, what do we do if we are creating a custom hook?
It depends on what it's for. We really don't do it very often, but the ones we've done recently, I think, have just gone into like a utils folder or like a helper folder.
Yeah.
Not co-located with the components.
And the fact that it's a hook doesn't necessarily differentiate it from other utilities. It's just...
I mean, it may in the future if we start doing it a lot more. It's been such a one-off scenario so far.
Makes sense. I do know that we have one in like the models folder for use root store. And so
or
we
use,
just pull it.
Yeah, use stores.
Use stores, actually. Yeah. So it pulls it from the models folder because that's where I guess you're grabbing the root store.
I consider that part of the sort of definition of the root store, or part of the configuration of the root store.
With the exception of root store, when I was working with Yulin, we've actually just put them in components. And I find that it's easy to differentiate because it starts with use, right? That's how you differentiate it, just from the like initial word. And that's...
And Yulin, of course, is a senior software engineer at Infinite Red that Harris has worked with.
Shout out.
Hey, Yulin, I'm sure you're listening to this. Robin's shaking her head. Yulin will not listen to this. But Harris, what do you mean? Like you have like app/component/use something?
Use interval, use whatever it is, use location. We would just put it in the components folder. And I actually like it because at the end of the day, it is a component. You might return JSX, you might return an object.
Oh, okay.
The way you differentiate it is just because it starts with use. And
okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
So I don't think we have a convention at the Infinite Red because of...
no.
Yeah, so...
And a lot of times, like, we do have conventions about some things, obviously, but the primaries have a lot of freedom within that, and then even to go beyond it in certain cases if they can sort of, make a case for it. But yeah, with custom hooks, it's just not a very big topic. So Harris, with that said, if you were starting your own project for your own startup or whatever, how would you organize your folders and files?
I mean, I really like Ignite, so I would just do that.
Yeah. And describe how that looks.
Typically, you'll have your store or models, which is where all the Mobx State Tree models live, whether it's like a store or just like an individual model, they all live there. We differentiate by naming the stores, sort of the stuff that are the child of the root store will have usually a dash store at the end. And any specific entity like a user or whatever will just not have the dash store.
Yep.
Yeah. And then components and screens and navigation folders. And I think that works really well. And I would put my hooks in components.
And you co-locate your styles in the files with the components.
Yeah, I would co-locate my styles. If I'm using style components, maybe I would create a new file, but typically I'll just have the object there and co-locate everything. And one thing I do tend to do is I always have 3 files per component. So usually it'll be like button.props.ts. Then it'll be like button.presets.ts and then the button.tsx. So,
yep.
Yeah.
And Robin, if you're starting something, what's sort of your favorite way to approach it?
Well, I think I'm supposed to say Bowser. Ignite.
You're supposed to say, "Wow, am I that much of a tyrant?" Say whatever you want. It's fine. It's just your job on the line.
I do. I do actually really like the way like just the default Bowser stack. I mean, there's a reason for that. I mean, I'm in control of what Bowser looks like, to be honest. I'm part of the team that builds it, and so at this point, if it wasn't a stack that I enjoyed using and made sense to me, it probably would have changed by now.
Yeah.
So I really like Bowser. I really like that it's kind of a hybrid between true like domain driven design and more of a sort by tech kind of approach.
It is a hybrid, isn't it?
Well, because we do separate out, like the state management files, the Mavic state tree stores are separate. Like even if you have like a user store and then you have maybe a profile screen, like those aren't co-located. You have your stores and you have your components and those are separate. But I do really like that you have little units. So like you'll have a component folder and within that folder is the component file itself, the storybook file if there is one, any assets that it needs, which I really like. If that specific component uses an image rather than having like a big old bucket of images at the root of your project. If you have an image that's only used by this one component, it's right there in the folder with it.
Right in the folder, yeah.
Same goes with models. If the model has a test, it's in the same folder. If the model has a really specific helper that I just want to move into its own file, I'll leave it in the folder with the model.
Right in that folder, yeah.
Yeah, and so that it makes it so that if I want to delete something, it's really easy. Just delete the whole folder. I think if I were doing a side project or just like playing around with something, I would probably leave it pretty flat. I'm a big fan of not optimizing for a problem that you don't have.
Yeah.
So I'm more inclined to just like have my app.js file and like maybe a separate component file, but just not bothered adding any folders. But for a legitimate, like full-fledged app, I usually go with Bowser.
Yeah, awesome. And by the way, by the time people listen to this, they'll probably have heard that we also have moved sort of away from Bowser toward a new rewrite, Ignite 6, which is codename Flame. But it's basically the same. There's really not a major difference between Bowser and Flame. The main thing is just an architecture change.
Right. So, the stack is really similar, but the tooling around it is
different. Sorry. Yeah. Tooling is different. So when we say Bowser, we really mean the latest version of Ignite, which is we've kind of gotten away from, having the boilerplate be separate. For myself, I would agree really with what you just said there, Robin. I'm very similar. Bowser. See, I just said that. Ignite really. Ignite really does kind of mirror my thinking there. I'm very pragmatic when it comes to this stuff. I'm not ideological. I want to see empirical evidence. If people want to try something like we did early on when that guy wanted to when that developer wanted to experiment with more of a domain-driven focus, we experimented and we found out that there were things about it we didn't like and we actually backed off on some of those things. That's actually why we ended up with a hybrid. We went full DDD, and then we kind of came back halfway toward the Andros, the original Andros structure, and kept the parts we liked about both, which was really cool. I like that sort of approach, like be pragmatic about it. I will mention one more thing. We are working with a client who has dictated the structure of their app. Totally happy to do that as a consultancy. We're flexible, and they use like Lerna packages just everywhere. Just tons of packages. And so as an example, screens are not even in their app package at all. Screens are in like its own package, and you can like drill down and see login and register. And then underneath that, then there's register, and then you'll see styles and the index.tsx.
So did they give you an already developed product and ask you to enhance it? Because how did they already have like an app structure?
Well, it was basically a CTO. So this happens regularly where it's a CTO who came to us and said, I need React Native experts to work with me. to help me. I don't have enough people on my team to do it. I'm kind of driving forward actually, I think he's the head of mobile development at the company. And so we provided 2, now we're actually up to 4 developers, and we're going to come back to 2 after a bit here. But they are working with that person. He is the lead, and our developers are secondary developers on that. And they're providing their expertise. They've both been working in React Native for 5 years, so they know a lot. And he's really just been working for about 6 months or so. But he's also a very accomplished, very well, very experienced developer in his own right. And so he came in with a lot of ideas about how he wanted to structure it. And we've certainly been just kind of working within the direction he wants to go there. Certainly there are maybe decisions he's made that we wouldn't necessarily go that direction, but he's also been open to feedback. Like he asked me, he was saying something about like the whole screens and components thing, like that was coming up, and I said, technically you're right, but I have found in practice that separating screens out into their own thing helps for just discoverability and things like that.
It helps with the mental model of your app, because you think about your app in terms of like, okay, this is the screen and this is the screen.
So I think we've successfully beaten this topic to death. So let's move into weird bugs, the part of the program where we talk about weird bugs that we've encountered along the way, and maybe how we've solved them, or if we still haven't solved them.
I have a weird issue I encountered, and it's not necessarily a bug. It's more of a compatibility problem. Maybe the listeners can benefit out of that too. So I was like trying to upgrade this project, and I was like, why aren't you using Hermes engine? So let's go ahead and utilize Hermes, and we upgrade it to like React Native latest version and all of that stuff. But Hermes just wouldn't work, and I ran into a lot of errors. And after realizing, it took me a couple days to realize that the project was using React Native Firebase. And apparently, if you have React Native Firebase, you can't use Hermes. So that was an interesting thing to note, which I wasn't aware of.
I wonder if it has to do with like proxy support or something along those lines, because I know that Hermes hasn't had proxy until more recently.
So it's kind of a deadlock there, because they really want to upgrade to Hermes to improve the Android performance, but getting away from React Native Firebase is not an easy task either, because that would involve a lot of, rewiring and rethinking.
A lot of people use Firebase.
Yeah, so it's kind of a deadlock situation there. So I hope, somebody somewhere fixes this.
I'm going to give a free little commercial spot here, ad for my friends over at Invertase. I actually don't know how to say the word. Invertase. They are the people behind React Native Firebase, and they are consultants. Good friends of Infinite Red, and definitely go talk to them. I'm sure that they can help you out.
Very cool. Yeah.
So, but yeah, I've always had really good luck talking with those folks when I've had problems with React Native Firebase. They're really good engineers. I think they're based in the UK.
Okay. I did see a pull request on the Hermes, on React Native Firebase a few months ago, and they responded saying that the JavaScript engine from Hermes and React Native Firebase has some compatibility issues. So hopefully, they work on it. It's probably not an easy task.
Yeah, no kidding. Brand new JavaScript engine. Robin, I think you had a weird bug as well. You want to dive into that one?
I did have a weird bug. One of those lovely date-related bugs. So what happened was we got back to work in the new year, and all of a sudden we were getting a test failure that we weren't getting before, which is always you're like, something is date related. The test was testing a function on a person model. So the model was for a person, and we were calculating their age based on their date of birth. And the date of birth format that we get from the server is just a day value, a month value, and a year value. So we would assemble those values into their birth date and then compare it to the current year to get their age. So what was happening was the test failure said their age was off by 1 year. And so at first I thought, well, okay, so that means we just it's a brittle test. We didn't account for offsetting it. The person just turned a year older when the new year happened. And so I just need to make the test less brittle. And I get into the test and we've already accounted for that. Like we're already adding or like subtracting an offset from their age to account for that. And so I look closer at the test failure and it's actually in the opposite direction than I would expect. And so I look closer at the age function. I'm like, what is wrong here? Like we're offsetting correctly. We're doing this, like the subtraction correctly. And then I hover over the date initialization where we're like taking the 3 values and making them into a birth date. And I look at the tooltip and it says that the month value starts at 0.
Oh no.
Because for whatever crazy reason, JavaScript dates index the months using 0 index rather than the more logical like month of the year, with January being 1. And so, of course, the way you would write a date is 1 dash whatever. So that's what we were putting in. So it was actually thinking that this person's birthday was a month later. So our test assumed that they had already aged up by a year, but the calculation was thinking they were still a month younger than we were thinking they were. So don't let that bite you. JavaScript dates, the months are 0 indexed.
Interesting.
Yes.
What was the actual feature? Was it actually something to do with their birthday, or it was just this?
The feature was just that we needed to check their age for like if they're over 65 for some reason. Right, so we just needed to know how old they were.
It was a healthcare related situation. Yeah, and I think this comes from way back in the day. This decision was made for some reason. I think it was like, sort of a POSIX thing way back in the day or something like that. Like basically, yeah, the decision was made a very long time ago and it has never, it's influenced things ever since. But I'm sure that it's the source of many bugs, having that, because the assumption, the day luckily is one base, one index.
Yeah.
Can you imagine if the days were not one indexed, if they were like,
oh my gosh.
Hey, November 29th is 10.
Everything would be out of whack.
Yeah. Very bizarre.
Everything would be, be so bad. But I guess at least it would be consistent. Okay. Well, people can find us on Twitter. You can find the official Twitter handle at React Native RDIO. React Native Radio, but missing the A there. You can find Harris at Nomadic Spoon, Aditi at Aditi Ravi. You can find Robin at Robin_Heinz with an E at the end. And you can find me at Jamin Holmgren, all on Twitter. Feel free to hit us up and let us know what you liked about the episode. If you have complaints, you can keep them to yourself. I'm joking. It's fine. You can DM me. I have open DMs. Hit me up. And as always, thank you to our producer and editor, Todd Worth, also my co-founder of Infinite Red, and our transcript and release coordinator, Jed Bartowski, and our social media coordinator, Missy Warren. Thanks to our sponsor, Infinite Red. Check us out at infinite.red/React Native. Special thanks to all of you listening today. Make sure to subscribe. Tell a friend. Of course, we'd love to have more people tune in to React Native Radio. So if you like this episode, send it to a friend, please. That would be very, very cool of you. And thanks again to all my co-hosts for being here today. And we will see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.